Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission is always the same, to take a colossal figure, strip away the pop culture myths, and see what the raw source material reveals. And today we are plumbing the depths of a writer whose very name conjures darkness, terror, and the relentless tapping of a beak on a chamber door, Edgar Allan Poe.
That's right.
Poe, who lived from 1809 to 1849, is instantly synonymous with the macabre. He is the central, brooding architect of American Gothic fiction and, so critically, the inventor of the detective story.
He really is.
But if you only know him as the mad genius who wrote The Raven, you are missing the most fascinating parts of his story. Our sources today take us far beyond the crypt, revealing a surprisingly modern, complex, and intensely analytical mind.
Yeah, analytical is the key word.
So we're going on a deep dive to examine how this perpetually struggling writer managed not just to shape global literature, but also to function as a highly successful cryptographer, a caustic literary critic, and incredibly, a cosmological theorist.
And his work anticipated elements of the Big Bang Theory by nearly a century. It's wild.
We're going to understand the calculation behind the chaos.
And to understand the chaos, you really have to start with the perpetual struggle. It is the single most important lens through which to view his entire career.
The money.
Always the money.
Yeah.
Poe was, you could argue, the very first well-known American author who tried to sustain his life exclusively through his writing.
And that was a bad idea back then.
Oh, it was an act of financial self-destruction. In the mid-19th century American literary marketplace, it was basically impossible.
We often talk about the starving artist, but why was the system so specifically rigged against him at that precise moment in American history?
It boils down to a colossal legal loophole. The complete and utter lack of international copyright law.
Ah, okay.
So imagine trying to sell a product that a major competitor can just distribute globally for free.
Right.
American publishers, driven by pure economics, preferred to sell cheap, unauthorized copies of popular British authors. We're talking figures like Charles Dickens or Sir Walter Scott.
Because they didn't have to pay them.
They didn't have to pay them a cent in royalties. So this meant Poe, trying to sell original American content, was competing directly with literally free content from world-class established talent.
That's an impossible situation.
It made his existence a brutal, decade-long scramble for scraps. His groundbreaking work, regardless of its literary merit, was instantly hampered by market forces that preferred piracy over paying their own domestic talent. This desperation, it dictates every failed magazine launch and every abrupt relocation we see in his life.
Okay, so let's unpack the biographical foundations of all this turmoil. He was born Edgar Poe in Boston on January 19th, 1809. His parents were traveling actors, and his early life, it really does read like the prologue to a Gothic novel.
It's pure melodrama. His father abandoned the family in 1810.
Just gone.
Vanished. And then his mother died of consumption pulmonary tuberculosis. Just a year later, he was an orphan before he was 3.
Wow. And that profound, repeated early loss of a mother figure to disease. It's not just a personal tragedy, is it? It becomes this massive, defining shadow over his entire literary output.
Absolutely. The 2-year-old Poe was taken in by John and Frances Allen in Richmond, Virginia. They were a wealthy merchant family involved in everything from cloth and tobacco to, and this is notable, the slave trade.
But they never formally adopted him.
Never. He gained the name Edgar Allan Poe, but he was always an outsider.
And John Allan's role was intensely complicated, wasn't it? He wasn't exactly a stable parental figure.
Far from it. The relationship was volatile and just completely inconsistent. Allan would alternately spoil Poe with an expensive European education and these extravagant gifts, but then he would aggressively discipline him and withhold affection.
That's a classic push-pull.
It is. This pattern of lavish support followed by cruel abandonment, it created an enduring psychological template for Poe. It fed right into his lifelong issues with stability and authority.
That initial spoiling did, however, afford him a superior early education, right?
Oh, absolutely, yes. From 1815, the Allens took him to the United Kingdom, where he attended grammar school in Scotland, which was Allen's birthplace, and then a boarding school in London. He returned to Richmond in 1820.
So he gets this deep classical education fluency in languages that would serve him well later.
Yes, but the psychological instability was already baked in. You can see it a few years later.
Right, when the relationship with Allan completely fractures once Poe enrolls at the University of Virginia. So tell us about that descent into academic chaos and financial desperation.
The University of Virginia, which was founded on Thomas Jefferson's ideals of self-governance, was a hot mess in 1826.
A hot mess, how?
Well, students were supposed to govern themselves, but the strict rules against gambling, alcohol, and guns were utterly disregarded. The atmosphere was just chaos, and the dropout rate was astronomical.
And Poe gets caught up in it.
He does. Trying to keep up appearances among the wealthier students, he accumulated heavy gambling debts during his single year there. He was completely out of his depth.
And he immediately cast the blame on Allan. Now, was that justified, or was that just a convenient narrative for his own self-sabotage?
I think it's a mix. Poe accused Allan of not providing sufficient funds for tuition, texts, and living expenses, which, that was partially true. Allan was famously tight-fisted.
But Poe didn't help his own case.
No, he significantly worsened his own position through reckless gambling and spending. The estrangement was complete enough that when he left the university after only 1 year, he couldn't return to Richmond.
And his childhood sweetheart had moved on?
Exactly. Sarah Elmora Royster had married another man during his absence. So he's broke, he's heartbroken, and he's got nowhere to go.
Unable to support himself in Boston, he took the most drastic step, which resulted in this truly spectacular confluence of identity deception.
He was completely desperate. By April 1827, he's living hand-to-mouth in Boston, even using the pseudonym Henri Le Rene.
Henri Le Rene.
By May, he enlists in the U.S. Army as a private. And get this, he signs up under the assumed name Edgar A. Perry and claims to be 22 years old. He was only 18.
So the eventual literary titan starts his public life with a total flop, published under a false identity, while he's serving in the military under another false identity.
It is the definition of Poe drama. While he was stationed at Fort Independence, his first book, Tamerlane and Other Poems, was published that year, a slim 40-page collection credited only to a Bostonian.
It just vanished.
Completely. Only 50 copies were printed, and it just disappeared without a trace. But despite this quiet, unrecognized literary debut, Poe was actually a competent soldier. He rose quickly to the rank of sergeant major for artillery.
He eventually revealed his true identity to get a discharge, and this led to a temporary reconciliation with Allan.
That reconciliation was primarily prompted by tragedy. Frances Allan, his foster mother, died in February 1829.
The woman who'd been kind to him.
Yes, John Allan, maybe softened by grief and recognizing Poe's potential, agreed to support Poe's application for an appointment to the United States Military Academy at West Point.
So he's back on track, seemingly.
For a moment. He was honorably discharged from the Army and entered West Point in July 1830.
But that reconciliation was terminally fragile.
It was doomed from the start.
Yeah.
John Allan had remarried, and bitter quarrels erupted, partly concerning children Allan had fathered outside of his marriage.
So Allan completely disowned him.
Completely. Removed him from his will permanently. And Poe, recognizing that the military path was no longer a viable route to any kind of financial or social stability, intentionally got himself court-martialed.
He engineered his own failure.
He totally engineered his own academic and military failure.
Exactly.
He was found guilty in February 1831 of gross neglect of duty for refusing to attend classes, church, and formations.
And what's wild is that he pleaded not guilty.
Right, but that was just a tactic. It was to ensure the sentence was dismissal, which he achieved. This episode, it illustrates a crucial pattern. When Poe felt trapped or abandoned, he would ruthlessly self-sabotage to secure his freedom, regardless of the financial cost.
So following this dramatic exit, he finds a new domestic nucleus in Baltimore with his widowed aunt, Maria Clem, and her daughter, Virginia, his cousin.
And Maria Clem, whom he affectionately called Muddy, she really provided the emotional stability and domestic anchor that had been missing his entire life.
But this stability was laced with unconventionality, to say the least.
It was. In 1836, at age 27, Poe married Virginia Clem. The records show she was only 13 years old.
13.
And they had to get a witness to falsely attest that she was 21.
Regardless of the unusual age difference, though, the relationship seemed to be built on a deep mutual dependency, which makes the subsequent tragedy all the more acute.
It was a complex, loving, and just deeply tragic relationship, and tragedy struck in January 1842. While Virginia was singing and playing piano, she showed the first signs of consumption tuberculosis.
And Poe's description of it is just wrenching.
He described it as the sudden breaking of a blood vessel in her throat.
That moment must have been devastating. I mean, an almost exact, horrible echo of his mother's fate.
It was crushing, and biographers widely agree the psychological toll was immense.
Mm.
Virginia suffered from this chronic illness for 5 years, dying in their small cottage in Fordham, New York, in January 1847.
And this is when he starts drinking heavily.
Allegedly, yes. The stress of watching the woman he loved, who was also his family connection and his cousin, slowly waste away, is what pushed him into heavy drinking.
And this triple loss mother, foster mother, and then his wife, it fuels his most persistent literary theme.
Absolutely. The repeated death of vital women in his life is the direct psychological source for his recurring theme, the death of a beautiful woman. It is a motif that defines so many of his most famous works.
And after Virginia's death, his search for stability just became desperate and erratic.
Completely. He attempted to court the poet Sarah Helen Whitman, which resulted in a failed engagement, mostly due to his erratic behavior and heavy drinking. Yet in the final months of his life, he was back in Richmond, having resumed a relationship with his childhood sweetheart, Sarah Elmira Royster.
He's forever seeking to recapture an idealized, stable past.
A past that never really existed.
So despite this continuous personal turbulence and financial peril, Poe manages to achieve something monumental. He pivots from being a failing poet to a successful prose writer and editor, and in doing so, he engineers the foundation of modern genre literature.
The shift was absolutely essential. After the early failures in poetry, Poe focused permanently on prose. He needed immediate, practical wins.
And that win came in 1833.
That's right. October 1833, his short story, MS Script Found in a Bottle, won a prize sponsored by the Baltimore Saturday Visitor.
And that single victory was his ticket into the editorial world, which gave him the consistent income he craved.
Precisely. It brought him to the attention of influential figures like John P. Kennedy, who mentored him and introduced him to Thomas W. White, the editor of the Southern Literary Messenger in Richmond. And this began the era of Poe, the tireless editorial entrepreneur,
Mastering the system.
mastering the mechanics of the burgeoning American periodical system.
He became assistant editor of the Southern Literary Messenger in 1835, but even this stability was immediately threatened.
Oh, immediately. White discharged him within weeks, allegedly for drunkenness.
And he came back.
He came back. The undeniable quality of Poe's writing and his critical acumen meant White reinstated him after Poe promised to reform. He stayed there until 1837. And during his tenure, he was a force multiplier.
A force multiplier.
He claimed the magazine's circulation shot up from 700 to 3,500. He wasn't just a writer. He was a circulation manager, a critic, and an ideas man all rolled into one.
He continued this pattern, right? Moving through the centers of American publishing, Philadelphia and New York, working for Burton's Gentleman's Magazine, and later the highly successful Graham's Magazine.
He did. But his true aspiration was always complete editorial control.
That was the dream.
That was the dream, the antidote to poverty and compromise. He yearned to produce his own journal, first called The Pen, and later rebranded as The Stylus.
And he got so close.
So close. He planned meticulously, even buying advertising space in the Saturday Evening Post in 1840 to announce its prospectus. This failed dream, the financial security and critical platform of The Stylus, it just represents the constant tension between his massive ambition and his brutal economic reality.
And it's such a profound irony that this man, who lived hand to mouth, essentially invented two incredibly lucrative global genres: the formalized short story and, most notably, detective fiction.
He was instrumental in shaping the modern short story, codifying it as a genre with structure and rules. His 1839 collection, Tales of the Grotesque and Arabesque, that cemented his reputation. But his creation of detective fiction is arguably his greatest structural legacy to world literature.
We credit him as the inventor, based on his three tales featuring C. Auguste Dupin, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, The Mystery of Marie Roget, and The Purloined Letter. So what specifically did Poe invent that didn't exist before?
Okay, so before Poe, you had mysteries, certainly, but you didn't have detective fiction. Poe invented the entire blueprint.
The whole formula.
The entire formula. The brilliant, eccentric, amateur consulting detective, that's Dupin, who solves crimes through pure intellect. The relatively dull, loyal sidekick, who is the narrator. The incompetent official police force.
A bumbling tops.
The bumbling cops. And the mechanism of the locked room mystery. It's all there.
And Dupin operates through a method Poe called ratiocination.
Ratiocination. It's a cold, logical deduction that elevates reason above physical evidence. He doesn't rely on luck or brute force. He relies on analytical insight into the psychology of the criminal and the police alike.
And that framework is the foundation for everything that comes after.
It is the foundation upon which Sherlock Holmes and every single subsequent detective has been built.
The impact is just undeniable. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle credited Poe directly, saying, "Each of Poe's detective stories is a right from which a whole literature has developed."
And the mystery writers of America acknowledging this by naming their annual awards the Edgars. It's a genre so essential today that it's easy to forget it was codified by a struggling magazine editor in the 1840s.
Shifting now to his most famous mode, Gothic horror. Poe wasn't just telling scary stories, he was psychologically dissecting terror, a key characteristic of dark romanticism.
Exactly. Dark romanticism, a subgenre of American romanticism, emerged as a direct reaction to what they saw as the naive optimism of transcendentalism.
So while transcendentalists saw inherent goodness in nature and humanity,
The dark romantics, like Poe, Hawthorne, and Melville, they focused on human fallibility, inherent evil, decay, madness, and melancholy.
and Poe's fiction is preoccupied with the physics of death.
That's a great way to put it. He explores the psychological terror of decomposition, the fear of premature burial, which is a huge societal fear at the time, and the reanimation of the dead. It's horror that is deeply internal, focusing on the deterioration of the mind as much as the body.
And during his lifetime, he was perhaps most widely known not as a fiction writer, but as a fiercely opinionated literary critic.
That's a crucial point most people miss. The vast majority of his writings were actually non-fictional reviews and essays. He was revered, yet deeply feared, and critic James Russell Lowell called him the most discriminating, philosophical, and fearless critic who has written in America.
And the fearless part led directly to his nickname, the Tomahawk Man.
The Tomahawk Man, he was brutal.
And he saved his sharpest attacks for the biggest names in American letters. Tell us about the Longfellow War.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
This was Poe's most famous critical battle. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was, at the time, America's most beloved and commercially successful poet. An absolute giant.
And Poe just went after him.
Relentlessly. He attacked him, accusing him of the heresy of the didactic.
Meaning,
Longfellow wrote poetry that was overly preachy, tried too hard to teach a moral lesson, and often lacked originality, sometimes, bordering on plagiarism.
so it's interesting that Poe, a writer who struggled for money, was essentially attacking a poet who is universally popular and financially secure.
It speaks to Poe's deep-seated elitism about art. He correctly predicted that Longfellow's reputation, while huge in the moment, would decline because his style lacked the necessary originality and depth. For Poe, popularity was a suspicious indicator. He often equated commercial success with artistic compromise.
And his disdain for the transcendentalists went beyond literary theory and became deeply personal.
Oh, absolutely. He ridiculed them as frog pondians, a reference to the Boston Common Pond, and mocked their style as metaphor run mad and lapsing into obscurity for obscurity's sake. Poe, the analytical engineer, couldn't tolerate what he perceived as their mystical vagueness and intellectual laziness.
This brings us to his philosophy of art. How did his pursuit of beauty reconcile with his frequently brutal critical style?
For Poe, beauty was the critical standard. It was the only standard. In essays like The Poetic Principle, he argued that the ultimate goal of art is the attainment of beauty, not truth, not morals, and certainly not political messaging.
And he emphasized originality.
And the importance of achieving a single specific effect, where every element of work, every word, every image contributes meticulously to a preconceived emotional or psychological result, and everything extraneous is removed.
This concept of the single specific effect feels incredibly modern. It's almost like he was pioneering user experience design.
Exactly. Poe wasn't just influencing literature. He was essentially writing the rules for modern, high-impact content creation. If you think about a perfectly crafted short film or a tightly edited suspense trailer,
Or even a viral video.
that is Poe's unity of effect in action. He demanded ruthless efficiency in storytelling.
He then formalized this concept of calculation in his controversial essay, The Philosophy of Composition.
Ah, yes. That essay is legendary because Poe claimed to describe, in reverse, the precise, calculated, step-by-step logical method he used to write his most famous poem, The Raven.
He deconstructed his own creative process.
It's an almost scientific deconstruction of creativity, arguing that no part of the poem was accidental. He claimed he chose the length, the meter, the central theme melancholy, and the refrain nevermore, based on rigid aesthetic principles.
But critics suspect this was perhaps Poe's greatest fictional work.
Many do. Critics like Joseph Woodcrush suggest the essay was less a truthful memoir and more an ingenious exercise in the art of rationalization.
So he wrote the poem first and then came up with the theory after.
That's the idea. He wrote the poem organically, experienced its massive success, and then reverse-engineered a perfect logical theory to prove his artistic genius was entirely premeditated. Either way, it underscores that his mind operated like an analytical engine, applying cold logic whether he was creating a terrifying poem or dissecting the literary failures of his peers.
And whether it was calculated or spontaneous, the result was shattering. When The Raven was published in the Evening Mirror in January 1845, it made Poe an instant household name.
Instant, vast, popular fame. Yet here's the ultimate punchline of his financial life. Despite achieving unprecedented notoriety that reached across the country, he was paid only $9 for its original publication.
$9?
$9. His fame was boundless, but his profit was microscopic. It's a perfect encapsulation of the market forces that were always working against him.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. We transition from Poe, the literary engineer, to Poe, the scientific visionary. The ruthless calculation he applied to poetry and criticism, he also applied to the physical universe.
This is the most surprising layer of his genius. His fierce analytical interest in hard science. We're talking specifically about his 1848 essay, Eureka, a prose poem.
A prose poem?
He intentionally called it that because he insisted it was a work of profound truth, derived from pure intuition, which he considered superior to the laborious scientific method.
He thought he could intuit his way to cosmic truth.
He did. And this intuition led him to two extraordinary scientific anticipations. Let's start with Olber's paradox.
Okay, remind us what that is.
Right, so Olber's paradox asks a fundamental question. Why is the night sky dark if the universe contains an infinite number of stars?
Right, if it's infinite, shouldn't we see a star in every direction?
Exactly. If the universe were infinite and static, every line of sight from Earth should eventually terminate on the surface of a star, meaning the entire night sky should be blindingly bright.
So how did Poe, the writer of horror, plausibly solve this paradox in 1848?
Poe proposed the correct modern-day solution. The night sky is dark because the universe is finite in age, not necessarily finite in size.
Okay.
There's a horizon of light determined by how far light has been able to travel since the universe began. So distant stars whose light hasn't reached us yet simply cannot illuminate our sky.
That's a profound, simple insight that predated formal cosmology.
It's an incredible leap of intuition.
But the truly mind-bending prediction is his anticipation of the Big Bang Theory. How did his theory in Eureka map onto that concept?
Poe postulated that the universe originated from a single primordial particle, which he termed the original unity.
The original unity.
This particle, via divine volition, expanded outward due to a repulsive force, dispersing matter evenly across space. He further proposed that this expansion would eventually stop and reverse, contracting back into the single particle in an event we now know as the Big Crunch.
So the universe starting from a single point and expanding.
A pulsating universe model. It's remarkably close to modern Big Bang theory. He anticipated it by roughly 80 years.
That is just extraordinary, especially since he threw out the scientific method entirely. You mentioned it wasn't perfect, though.
No, not at all. While the intuition was powerful, Poe ignored established laws in favor of his unified theory. For instance, he disregarded Newtonian principles, specifically concerning the conservation of angular momentum, which led to inaccuracies about planetary density and rotation.
But he believed in it.
Oh, he was so convinced of its truth that he insisted Eureka was his masterpiece, a work of art that was also scientifically true.
Okay, so moving from the universe to secret communication, the same analytical mind that created Dupin was obsessed with cracking ciphers, turning code breaking into a public sensation.
This was a magnificent promotional stunt that simultaneously highlighted his genius. He publicly challenged readers of the Philadelphia paper, Alexander's Weekly Express Messenger, to submit ciphers, promising to solve them all.
And people sent them in.
They did, and he solved them. He then published the essay A Few Words on Secret Writing in 1841 and made ciphers a essential plot device in the Gold Bug.
So was Poe actually a master cryptographer, or was he just an acute observer of human ignorance?
He was definitely the latter, utilizing his analytical edge. Poe's method was mostly limited to solving simple substitution ciphers, where one letter is consistently replaced by another. He wasn't solving the truly complex codes of the age.
His brilliance lay in something else.
His brilliance lay in realizing the general public was completely ignorant of frequency analysis.
Explain frequency analysis for us.
Sure. If you look at the English language, certain letters appear with far greater frequency than others. E is the most common, followed by T, A, O, and so on.
Okay.
So in a simple substitution cipher, the most frequently used symbol in the coded message must correspond to E. Poe used this analytical insight, the same kind Dupin uses in the detective stories, to quickly break ciphers that seemed impossibly complex to the average reader.
The public was so easily fooled, and Poe just capitalized on that analytical edge. But the impact of this stunt was far-reaching.
It truly was. Poe's theatrical code-breaking played a major role in popularizing cryptograms in American media. But more profoundly, America's foremost cryptologist of the 20th century, William Friedman.
The guy who cracked the Piratia code.
The very same. Friedman credited reading The Gold Bug as a child with inspiring his entire career. He later led the team that deciphered Japan's critical military and diplomatic Purpurti code during World War II. An 1840 short story fueled a critical, real-world intelligence victory.
That's incredible. And just to add a fun footnote to his cryptographic expertise, 2 ciphers he published in 1841 under the pseudonym W.B. Tyler proved so challenging they defied professional efforts.
And they weren't fully cracked until 1992 and 2000. So even when he tried to be simple, he could still hide complex secrets.
He was a fascinating mixture of showmanship and profound insight. And speaking of defiance, we have to integrate his political opinions, which were as caustic as his literary criticism.
They absolutely were.
Poe was highly critical of the American political system, which he often labeled a mobocracy. How did this political elitism manifest?
It's crucial to connect his political views back to his artistic ones. Just as he distrusted popular taste, like with Longfellow, he distrusted the masses politically. He viewed the government as being led by an ignorant, easily manipulated electorate.
Which got him labeled anti-American.
Yes, and bitterly hostile by some contemporaries.
But he didn't shy away from controversy, even speaking out against specific societal evils.
No, he didn't. In The Southern Literary Messenger, he explicitly critiqued the practice of lynching, calling its proponents a trained band of villains and unlawful and abandoned wretches. This was a rare, unambiguous moral stance against a horrific practice of the time.
And his critique extended to the point of proposing a political secession.
He did, in Graham's Magazine in 1846. He proposed a geographical and political split. He suggested separating the Appalachian South from the existing United States and naming this new nation the United States of Alleghania.
Alleghania.
This highly provocative thought just underscores his profound dissatisfaction with the structural flaws he perceived in the American experiment.
So this intensely analytical, genre-inventing, politically defiant writer meets his end in what is arguably the most dramatic and confusing death in literary history. Let's talk about the final strange days of Edgar Allan Poe.
The mystery of Poe's death is perfect material for one of his own stories. On October 3, 1849, he was found semi-conscious in Baltimore by a man named Joseph W. Walker.
And the details are just bizarre.
Bizarre is the word. Crucially, he was found lying outside a polling place, described as being in great distress and wearing clothes that were conspicuously not his own, ill-fitting, dirty, and cheap. He was completely incoherent.
Unable to explain his condition.
Not at all.
And that detail about the clothes, the bizarre disguise, that is the key to some of the most sensational theories, isn't it?
It is the most compelling detail. He was taken to Washington Medical College, where he remained confused, hallucinating, unable to endure light or sound. He repeatedly called out the name Reynolds before his death 4 days later, on October 7, 1849. He was 40 years old.
And his final recorded words.
Lord help my poor soul.
And the mystery only deepened because the crucial evidence was immediately lost.
Vanished. All relevant medical records, including his death certificate, have disappeared. Contemporary papers listed the vague cause as congestion of the brain or cerebral inflammation.
Which were just euphemisms.
Exactly. Euphemisms often used for deaths linked to intoxication or public scandal, usually to protect the reputation of the deceased's family.
But modern medical speculation ranges wildly.
It covers almost every severe ailment. Delirium tremens from alcoholism, epilepsy, syphilis, brain tumors, even rabies, a theory proposed in 1996 based on the description of his final symptoms.
But the most compelling, specific historical theory that accounts for the strange clothes is cooping.
That's the one.
We need to unpack cooping for the listener. What was this specific electoral fraud that might have killed him?
Cooping was a horrific, violent form of voter fraud common in Baltimore in the 19th century, especially around elections. Gangs working for political campaigns would kidnap vulnerable men off the street.
Often homeless or drunk individuals.
Right. They'd take them to a secluded room, the coop, give them heavy drugs or alcohol to ensure compliance, and often beat them.
And then what?
They would then forcibly disguise the victim in different sets of cheap clothes and parade them to multiple polling places, forcing them to vote repeatedly for the specific candidate.
So Poe being found semi-conscious in strange, ill-fitting clothes near a polling place.
The cooping theory provides a rational, historically specific explanation for the bizarreness of his final state. He was simply discarded once he was no longer useful, likely suffering from the drugs and trauma.
It's a tragic, violent end for a man who often wrote about victims abandoned in bizarre, inexplicable circumstances. But the story doesn't end with his death. It ends with a literary smear campaign orchestrated by his rival.
Tragically, Poe's final narrative was hijacked by Rufus Wilmot Griswold, a minor writer and editor whom Poe had mercilessly savaged in his criticism. Griswold held a deep, profound, years-long grudge.
And Griswold struck immediately, starting a smear campaign on the very day Poe was buried.
He did. He wrote a high-profile, vicious obituary under the pseudonym Ludwig that appeared in the New York Tribune. The opening lines set the tone. Edgar Allan Poe is dead. This announcement will startle many, but few will be grieved by it.
Oof. And then Griswold secured a position that allowed him to control the historical record.
He somehow convinced Poe's aunt, Marie Clem, and others to appoint him Poe's literary executor. Griswold used this position to systematically attempt to destroy Poe's reputation.
How?
In the 1850 collected edition of Poe's works, Griswold included a biographical article titled Memoir of the Author, where he depicted Poe as a depraved, drunken, drug-addled madman.
But this depiction was built on massive distortion and outright falsehoods.
Entirely. For instance, the claims that Poe was a habitual drug addict are largely fabricated. Those who knew Poe well, like his friend John Neal, immediately denounced Griswold in print, pointing out the gross exaggerations and lies.
And the letters.
The most damning pieces of evidence, Poe's personal letters that Griswold presented, were later revealed to be outright forgeries.
But the damage was already irreparable.
Absolutely. Griswold's biography, though poisoned by malice, was the only comprehensive account available and was widely reprinted. It ensured the public consumed Poe's thrilling dark works through the sensationalized lens of an evil and tormented genius.
In a perverse twist of fate, the man who tried to destroy him guaranteed his lasting popular notoriety.
He did. He made Poe's biography as thrilling as his darkest fiction.
The story of Poe's life is just defined by mystery, tragedy, and relentless analytical genius. His literary legacy is one of explosive, enduring influence, particularly across the Atlantic.
Poe was one of the first 19th century American authors to become profoundly more popular in Europe, particularly France, than in his native United States.
Why France, specifically?
This overseas fame was largely cemented by the early and deeply sympathetic French translations by the great poet Charles Baudelaire, who saw Poe as a kindred spirit. His renditions became the definitive versions of Poe's work in continental Europe.
And that influence just rippled through major literary and cinematic figures for generations.
Oh, for sure. It impacted the pioneering science fiction writer Jules Verne, who was so taken with Poe's only complete novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, that he wrote a sequel to it.
And horror writers.
American horror masters, most notably H.P. Lovecraft, called Poe his god of fiction, and directly utilized Poe's concept of the unity of effect in creating cosmic terror.
And the thread extends directly to film.
Directly. The famed director Alfred Hitchcock acknowledged, "It's because I liked Edgar Allan Poe's story so much that I began to make suspense films."
However, not all of his peers appreciated the calculation or the darkness.
Far from it. As we noted, transcendentalist Ralph Waldo Emerson, a man Poe despised, derisively referred to Poe as the Jingle Man in reaction to the rhythmic, calculated nature of poems like The Raven.
The Jingle Man.
And Aldous Huxley, decades later, dismissed Poe's writing as vulgar, suggesting it was too poetical, equating his style to wearing a diamond ring on every finger, gaudy and excessive.
Despite the controversy and the criticism, Poe's physical legacy remains robust, immortalized in the mysterious narrative he left behind.
You can trace his life through commemorations. The Edgar Allan Poe National Historic Site in Philadelphia, the Edgar Allan Poe Cottage in the Bronx where Virginia died, and the Poe Museum in Richmond.
Though he never lived there.
Right. Ironically, he never lived in that specific oldest standing house in the city. More recently, the memorial sculpture, Poe Returning to Boston, unveiled in his birthplace in 2014, captures this persistent sense of a solitary figure striding against the wind, his life's work trailing behind him.
And nothing captures the enduring mystery more perfectly than the Poe toaster tradition.
The toaster is perhaps the ultimate piece of anonymous, spontaneous mythology built around Poe. For exactly 60 years, between 1949 and 2009, an unknown visitor left a bottle of French cognac and 3 roses at Poe's original grave marker every January 19th, his birthday.
A private ritual that became a public legend.
It was a beautiful, deeply private ritual that added immensely to his cult status. And the anonymity, the fact that the tradition ended as mysteriously as it began on his bicentennial in 2009, ensures that Poe, the master of the macabre, continues to be defined by a permanent, unsolvable enigma.
Which brings us back to that essential, brutal irony of his life that we began with.
The man who tried to destroy his reputation, Rufus Wilmot Griswold, inadvertently guaranteed Poe's lasting popular appeal by sensationalizing his life and cementing the enduring myth of the tormented, depraved artist.
So, our final thought for you to explore is this. What if Poe had actually lived long enough to stabilize his finances, launch the stylus, and realize his dream of becoming America's ultimate literary gatekeeper?
Could he have maintained a successful journal with his analytical demand for beauty and his caustic tomahawk man style? Or would his controversial political views and relentless critical attacks on the establishment have inevitably doomed that effort regardless?